They'd taken the island swiftly. The storm had sunk what remained of the Targaryen fleet, and the few surviving loyalists were no match for Stannis' forces. Eventually, they'd either fallen to the sword or fallen to their knees. Before him, a large door marked with the Targaryen sigil stood as a final sentry, and even it yielded to a simple tapping of his knuckles on wood. A woman opened the door, her gaze that of a conquered enemy. Or perhaps her desolation came from another source, and Stannis' presence only compounded the tragedy. Her arms were stained with blood, as was the sodden rag clutched in her hand. Stannis signalled to his men to remain outside, and entered the room alone. The former queen's eyes, when they lifted from the child suckling at her breast, contained all the dying fire of the Targaryen dynasty. Her first and last meal, the only thing I can now give her, she whispered. In her youth, the queen's gaze had been an inferno. Any who'd foolishly impeded her will could attest to that. Years of abuse at her husband's hand had smothered it into a small flame. But dragons were stubborn creatures, and Rhaella Targaryen had held onto that fire despite what the gods had thrown at her. She had not let the cruelty of life break her. She had revelled in small joys, in the love of her children, the laughter of her grandchild, in the hope for a better future. Also the rumours, which Stannis generally ignored, had claimed. Yet now, with Robert crowned king, her family all but dead, her house defeated, and her own life draining away, only embers remained in her gaze. Her arms tensed around the babe, gathering it closer to her breast, as if she wished she could take it back into the safety of her body. The 3 handmaidens surrounding her stirred, their loyalty honed by years of service. Stannis Baratheon was not a man to pity others. He believed in justice for one's wrongdoings and rewards for good work. Yet he could feel the stirring sympathy as he gazed at this proud dragon's last stand. He felt no ill will towards the Targaryen. In fact, breaking his vow to the crown and supporting his brother's rebellion had been difficult for Stannis. Yet he had made his choice, and now his duty compelled him to see it through to the end. "My lady," he nodded, voice curt. Her gaze returned to the child, a forlorn smile at the title, a mockery of what she'd once been. "I named her Daenerys," the queen murmured. Her voice was a raw, reedy thing, but there was tenderness in her gaze. "Daenerys Stormborn, a mother's foolish fancy that she may grow to follow in her ancestors' steps and find happiness." The queen's laugh was hollow. "Are you here to kill her, Stannis Baratheon? A small babe, not even a day old." She shook her head, and then finally raised her gaze to his, blazing hatred. "Like your usurper brother, who sanctioned, who rewarded, the murder of my grandchildren." Stannis pressed his thin lips tightly together, teeth clenching. Yes, his brother had done as she said. He had seen the corpses of the Targaryen babes, still wrapped in that dishonourable manner, marking the ground before the Iron Throne. No matter how many times that spot was cleaned, the tainted would never abate. While it was a strategically sound move to eliminate any threats to his reign, Robert's actions were wrong. Stannis felt the shame staining him. Unlike his brother, he would not deny the evil of that act. "That should not have occurred," Stannis acknowledged, voice cold. "But beneath was an entreaty. I had no part in that," his soul whispered. "I tried to make it right. On behalf of House Baratheon, enough. I cannot absolve you, nor would I. The gods will be your judges. You and your brother, and all the dogs that follow him. Words don't matter, Stannis, only actions. If you want forgiveness, earn it." The passionate words seemed to steal what little of her energy remained as she slumped back farther into her pillows, hands shaking with the effort to hold the child. One of the handmaidens stepped forward, arms outstretched, but was waved away. Despite the dark sheets, Stannis could see the first inklings of just how doomed the former queen was. A stain was spreading on the thick fabric covering her middle. Her face was shinning with sweat and flushed with fever. The smell of blood permeated the air. Stannis did not believe in the gods, and even if they were real, he doubted they paid any attention to the foolish games of man. But he did believe that actions spoke, that words were wind. At that moment, he couldn't deny a growing respect for the dying queen. Blood of dragons, indeed. "Approach me, stag." The words were an order, but underneath the bravado, Stannis heard the first signs of desperation. He silently did as bid, coming to stand at her bedside. Arms shaking terribly, she lifted the child towards him. Stannis gazed down, nonplussed, at the tiny creature being presented to him. "Your Grace," one handmaiden protested, lurching forward as if to snatch the child away, as if Stannis was going to draw his sword and run the babe through. "Silence," Rhaella ordered, voice sharp as steel. The woman fell back, cowed. Violet eyes turned to Stannis, and he found his earlier assertions incorrect. The Queen's body may be dying, but the dragonfire in her eyes was alive and well. "Take her." His hand twitched up automatically at her tone, the voice of a mother, a queen. But he hesitated before taking the child. He had no experience with infants, he had none of his own, and had never had cause to handle one. Suddenly he became aware of the grime on his gloves and toes, which was a preposterous concern when the child's wrap was already stained red. "Take her," the Queen said again, weaker this time. Finally, slowly, he reached out and took the bundle, holding her awkwardly with stiff arms. The babe fussed and twitched, to his faint dismay. "What is happening?" Stannis looked back at the Queen, feeling a faint sense of dissociation. Just moments ago, he was seizing this castle, assured of his actions and confident in his decisions. Yet now he held a child his brother would surely order dead, and he felt more discomforted than he had in his entire life. It was the faint amusement that he witnessed on her face that finally Stannis snapped out of his stupor. "What is this? Why have you just surrendered her? I must take her to the king, and I will obey whatever orders he then gives." "So why?" she sighed, and her voice was weaker when she answered. "Because I have no other choice." "She came too late," Rhaella murmured, and there was a dry irony in her words, "and I could not send her with the Cerys, so the prince is gone." Her sigh was long, tired. "I have heard of you, Stannis Baratheon, Child-Slayer's kin." He stiffened, and the babe fussed again until he yielded his tension. "Your brother's reputation has travelled far, and I hear you are his exact opposite." Stannis felt the slight, like a slap to the face, reminded of a childhood being overshadowed by his brother. He ground his teeth together. His ire rose until she said, "And I thank the gods that you were the one sent to me." "What?" "You are not a lion's pet. You are not the usurper himself." "My brother is not a usurper," he snapped. He sensed the makings of some plot, as if invisible strings were quietly surrounding him, but he could find no way to stop them. "He is the rightful king by right of justice. He is a man whose reign began on the blood of children," Rhaella said dismissively. "Mark my words, he will never find comfort in that seat." Stannis clenched his jaw, mouth opening, but she cut him off. "Do you believe men should pay for the sins of their kin?" He hesitated, but answered truthfully, "No. A man should only pay for the sin he himself has committed." Rhaella exhaled, eyes closing briefly, then met his gaze soberly. As she spoke, her voice grew stronger and stronger. "Her name is Daenerys. Daenerys of House Targaryen. Daenerys Stormborn. Do not forget her name. She is a living, breathing creature, an innocent baby girl who should not have to suffer for being born daughter to a cruel man and weak woman. And she is now your duty." Stannis flinched back, stoic face betraying his shock. "What? Her life and her death? She is now your responsibility, Stannis, of House Baratheon. You have taken this island and everything on it, and that comes with a price. You will protect it. I, Rhaella of House Targaryen, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, order you to take care of my child. Prove your words. This is my last order in this life. And you will obey." Stannis couldn't move, could barely breath. He had been raised by powerful men, surrounded by commanders and soldiers, had gone up on the battlefield and faced terror, horror, and starvation during the rebellion. Despite all that, despite the fact that he knew she was no longer queen, Stannis felt the order wrap itself around his limb, felt the weight of a duty that was never supposed to be his drape itself on his shoulders. Suddenly, the bundle in his arms felt infinitely heavier. "You will accompany him," she ordered the handmaiden who had tried to take the baby earlier. The girl immediately nodded, as helpless to resist as Stannis felt. He suddenly realized that this dying woman was perhaps the strongest person he'd ever met, and that respect tightened his chains. "What am I doing?" "Wait," he finally protested, shaking his head to clear his ridiculous thoughts and swallowing the lump in his throat. "Are you mad? I cannot, will not, disobey my king." She only stared at him, silent, as his heart pounded in his ears. Stannis has never felt so emotional. He was the calm brother, the stoic one, so enduring in the face of a storm, so uncompromising in his convictions, that many doubted he could even feel. The Queen sighed again, and this time, when she closed her eyes, she didn't reopen them. Her arms fell to her side, listless, and Stannis panicked. She couldn't die and leave this burden upon his head. "Her life and her death, child slayer's kin," the Queen said, her voice only a whisper now, sighing once more. "You want forgiveness. Earn it." This time, when the Queen exhaled, no inhale followed. Stannis stood there for many moments, staring at her unmoving face. She looked much too peaceful for a woman who had caused such upheaval in Stannis's life. Around him the three women sobbed. He looked down at the baby, who began to fuss again, and then around at the room. "You have no duty to her," some part of him whispered. "Just the ravings of a madwoman. Another mad Targaryen. Give the child to Robert, and be done with it." He thrust the babe at the handmaiden tasked to follow him. She flinched, but quickly took the child, holding it protectively to her breast. Stannis breathed deeply, and slowly his mask of rock fell back upon his face. What had he done, shamming himself before strangers? "You name, girl," he demanded curtly. She flinched again, much to his annoyance, and shakily said, "Myra, my lord, clean the child and get ready. We depart in the morning. The rest of you, report to the Castellan for new duties and assignments. Tell him to honor the Targaryen funeral tradition and burn the former queen." He turned and strode to the door, piecing together his calm, regaining his confidence. Words of a mad woman. "My lord, please," Myra gasped, and Stannis turned, impatience stamped on his harsh face, blue eyes cold. She swallowed thickly, clutching the child closer. "What?" The girl licked her lips, bloody hands trembling as she drew the child even closer. The babe began to squirm. "Where are we going?" she whispered. Outside, the rumbling of an emerging storm began to twist. The baby began to cry, perhaps reminded of her birth, or perhaps finally sick of all the tension in the air. Daenerys Stormborn. Stannis ground his teeth together. Madwoman. Earn it. Her life and her death. We sail for King's Landing. Astride their tired horses, Eddard Stark and his company. Himself, 3 loyal swords, Howland Reed, and a young wet nurse with a baby in her arms, stared ahead at the large city with its massive, blood-red castle. His every muscle was weary, and the closer they got to the accursed city, the more his fatigue increased. "Gods, I want to go home." Ned hated King's Landing. He hated the smells, shit, fish, and rotting meat, the noise, drunks, whores, and the crying of orphans, and especially the emotions the cursed city evoked: rage, disappointment, bitter regret. Here, his father had burned. Here, his brother had strangled himself, desperate to stop the entertainments of a mad king. All the while, the court watched and did nothing. All the while, an evil king laughed. But now that king was dead, and the rage of those old torments had slowly yielded to grief, to a futile wish to close his eyes and awaken as a young boy again, his family whole around him, a young boy who would know what would happen, who could stop it. But that was a pointless wish, and Ned Stark had fresh torments upon his struggling shoulders, fresh regrets. "Promise me, Ned." A new king sat on the throne, a king Ned himself had fought for. His friend, his brother by choice. Robert Baratheon, who had befriended young, shy, awkward Ned Stark, newly fostered ward of the Eyrie, and helped him overcome his melancholy homesickness. They'd spent 8 years together, talked of their homes, laughter and jests, learned side by side. When they'd begun this rebellion, Ned had been a green boy who did not look deep enough into the heart of matters, a green boy determined to avenge his family and rescue his sister. "Promise me." He was a boy no longer, and his mistakes trailed behind him like a bloody cloak. Robert was his friend. Robert was his brother. But Robert had changed. A king who rewarded the murder of children. A king who refused to punish the Lannisters. A king who chose politics and power over honor and justice. Robert had changed. Or perhaps Ned had never really known him, never really looked beneath the surface. A man Lyanna ran from, a king she died in terror of. Promise me, Ned. Behind him, his nephew's son. He is my son. Jon Snow began to fuss, awoken from his sleep, as if Ned's thoughts had intruded upon his dreams. Ned glanced over his shoulder at Danae, a dronish wet nurse, who immediately began to rock the child. The boy's hair was black, and his eyes the cold steel of Ned's own. Only stark blood showed in his features, and Ned thanked the old gods for small mercies. He had to get the boy north. The south had long since cut down all their heart trees. "Please, my lord," Danae implored, "I beg you to rest a few moments. Your son needs to be washed and fed." Ned nodded, relieved to have an excuse to prologue the inevitable torment of the city, and ordered the men to make camp. It was nearly noon anyway, and a short meal would do them well. They'd been travelling north for months now, the pace slow as Ned tried to come to terms with all he knew and everything he'd lost. The wet nurse took Jon with her into the forest to be fed and cleaned. Ned motioned one of the Northmen after her to ensure she was protected. Howland came to sit beside him, away from the other men. "What are you going to tell them?" Ned didn't pretend to misunderstand. They'd avoided this discussion for too long. A bastard son, with a woman I was enamored with during the war. Robert won't question it. Jon has my features and my blood. Few will doubt his origins. "And the mother?" "Gone," he said, word hard and final. Howland didn't respond. He was the only living soul who knew the truth, but Ned didn't doubt the man's loyalty. If not towards Ned himself, then to Lyanna. Howland had loved Lyanna as if she were his sister. He would never betray her. "Some may think he's the Lady Danes." "It may not be a bad thing to foster those rumours," Howland said softly. Ned scowled fiercely at smaller man, pain striking his chest. He saw a pair of violet eyes condemning him, a beautiful face twisted in anguish as he presented a sword to her. Her family, her friends, her loved ones, all gone. She could stand it no longer. "Oh, no. I will not dishonor her memory in such a way," Ned hissed. "I caused her too much pain in life to continue to plague her soul after death." Ned remembered a tourney years ago, and the feeling of his heart about to burst from his breast as he danced with the most beautiful maiden he'd ever seen. Before duty and a title had fallen on his head, before he'd wed his brother's betrothed to further an alliance, before he'd known all this suffering, Ned the boy had envisioned a very different life for himself. Those dreams, and the woman in them, were gone now. "This is my fault. I should have seen it then." Everything started there. Or perhaps it had started when Ned had carried Robert's proposal home with him, when their father had declared Lyanna's marriage to his friend. He remembered the way her smile had died, the look in her eyes. Betrayal, he now knew, but hadn't seen then. A caged wolf. "Retired to cage my wild, free sister." Conversation done, Ned ate the rest of his meal in silence. Howland remained pensive beside him, the circles under his eyes ever darkening. Soon they once more saddled the horses and continued, the red castle growing ever larger, its shadow ever closer. "What do you think of him, Ned?" "Tell me truly," she'd asked, eyes on the red-clad knight with dragons on his plate. Young, green Ned Stark hadn't thought anything of it, hadn't paid attention to how his sister watched the prince, to how he'd watched her in return. "Prince Rhaegar, a good man by all account. They say the people love him," he'd responded, watching the crown prince unseat yet another opponent. The crowd had cheered, and young Ned's awe matched theirs, though you wouldn't know it, looking at his grim face. "I understand why," she'd murmured, smile soft. Aye, if Ned had only paid more attention at that time, perhaps all this heartache could have been avoided. Jon, in a rare show of discontent, began to fuss. The boy's small whimpers steeled his resolve. He would not fail her again. Around them, the trappings of the Targaryens were gone, the skulls vanished and perhaps destroyed, the final proof of a dynasty's end. Upon the Iron Throne, the newly crowned king shifted in discomfort. He was dressed lavishly in the Southern style, tunic decorated with golden stags. Ned, in his dusty northern armor, felt like an alien. At Robert's side was Jon Arryn, his hand, and the man who was a second father to them both. The colourful court. Many of the same high-born men and women who'd stood silent while his family burned watched the proceedings with power-hungry plots whirling in their minds. Robert had refused a private meeting, insisting Ned's party be brought to the throne room as soon as they'd entered the Red Keep. The hope on Robert's face was painful to view. No matter their falling out, this man was his friend, and Ned took no pleasure in his suffering. The king, tall, dark, broad of shoulder swept, his chill blue eyes over their small, bedraggled party. His eyes lit when he saw Danae, only to dull upon the realization that she was not the woman he sought. His eyes widened when the sleeping babe, and rage clouded his eyes. "My bastard son," Ned said swiftly, knowing what Robert assumed and how right he actually was. The court gasped and murmured behind him, making Ned's hands twitch in irritation. He could feel the shame crawling up his neck. Robert's eyes swung to him in surprise, momentarily distracted. "Your son, the Honourable Ned Stark, begat a bastard, while his wife awaits him? I didn't know you had it in you." Ned ground his teeth at the grinning approval in his friend's voice. Siring a bastard was a dishonourable act, and acknowledging one would stain him, his wife, and his house for many years, not to mention all the hardship he was forcing upon the poor boy. It was not a matter that should be met with amusement. "He is a good man, Lyanna, a great friend and a powerful warrior. He loves you and will treat you well, Ned," the boy had insisted, tired of his sister's constant criticisms of Robert. She'd stared at him and said quietly, "He doesn't love me, Ned. Not really. Just a girl with a pretty face. Just an idea. I know the difference. Infatuation, then. You will get to know one another, and deeper love will come. And besides, familial love is different from that between a man and his wife," he'd assured her, so blind, so arrogant. Lyanna had looked away, he hadn't paid enough attention to the nuances of her expression to note the guilt. "I hear he has a bastard," she'd retaliated, defensive. "One he doesn't even acknowledge. He won't honour his own child. He certainly won't honour me. Not like father, not like you." "Enough, Lyanna. He is a man with flaws, like everyone. You must try to be more accepting. You have a duty to your house, to your family. Besides, once you are wed, Robert will stop his more unsavoury activities. You'll see." Ned ignored the twinge of doubt. He knew Robert. He wouldn't dishonour his wife, his best friend's sister. Her gaze iced over, the now familiar coldness emerging. Ned softened. "Lyanna, I see already, Ned. I see him, do you? Where is she, Ned?" Robert's voice broke into the memory, the amusement gone. "No matter what she has gone through, Lyanna will always be a lady in my eyes and in the eyes of my court. I will take her as my wife, make her my queen. So bring her to me, Ned." He sounded desperate, denying the terrible reality. Ned regarded his friend and saw again his raw hope. Ned banished his traitorous thoughts in disgust. Robert loved Lyanna, just as Ned did. He would have done right by her. Face revealing his grief, Ned shook his head. Once, Robert swallowed, and he suddenly looked smaller, drained of his signature vitality. For many moments the court was totally silent. Robert's heartbreak was plain for all to see. Did that dragon swan kill her? Did Rhaegar murder her, Ned? The familiar fury began to fill Robert's blue eyes, face flushing red. "I shouldn't have killed him. I should have taken him prisoner and tortured him. That monstrous son of a whore." Ned turned away as the king continued to rage, voice louder and insults increasingly vulgar. The echoing room was deafened by his fury. Finally, Jon Arryn stepped forward, placing a hand upon Robert's shoulder. Like a doll cut from its strings, the king slumped forward, shaking. Ned's heart broke all over again. "The king is tired," the hand said firmly. "We shall adjourn court until the morrow. He will not be accepting visitors. My lords, my ladies, I apologize, but we must cancel today's feast. Good day." The court snaked out, whispering amongst themselves, sneaking interested glances at the king. Ned noted that few showed any sympathy. This was a poisonous place, and Ned did not envy his friend. Robert retreated to a room behind the throne, Jon Arryn at his side. He turned to his companions and saw baby Jon had awoken and began to fuss, no doubt frightened by Robert's rage. He ordered one of the servants that remained to find suitable rooms for his companions, and requested the child and his nurse be placed within his own chambers. He didn't trust the guards in this place, and ordered one of his men to stand outside the door. "Promise me, Ned." Finally, with a deep breath, he steeled himself to follow his friend, his brother by choice, and to lie to his face.